Good evening, and welcome to a community conversation of the Lorentzsen Center for Faith and Work, a program of the Offutt School of Business at Concordia College. My name is Per Anderson, Interim Director of the Center. Established 8 years ago, the Center honors the life of Norman Lorentzsen, Concordia graduate, CEO of Burlington Northern Railway, Regent of the College, and generous philanthropist. It seeks to advance integration of faith and work in support of the vision of the Offutt School to better society by preparing ethical leaders who are confident, curious, and globally competent. We gather this evening for the second of a series of conversations about good work and its future toward respect, engagement, and meaning. We began last month talking about essential workers and workplace safety in the pandemic under the claim of respect. Our panelists, Paul Austin, Janelle Regenball, and John Rewer, spoke to the obstacles to respect in the workplace posed by the absence of a public safety net and shared practice with a lethal virus. Last month, we looked at one of the ways that work is changing in demanding ways. Workplace safety remains urgent, and I encourage you to watch this conversation if you have not done so. Google Lorentzsen Center for Faith and Work to access our video archive. In accord with the teaching of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, we seek through this series to understand good work and its future for all, including future generations. We noted last month and need to be mindful that work today does not benefit persons and society as it should. Only 1/3 of workers report being engaged with their work. 1/3 report active disengagement. Why is that? This evening, we consider again respect at work given the persisting reality of racism in the US, knowing that racism is global and undermines good work for much of humanity. The work disengagement of some Americans surely stems from racism. Last month, we noted that BIPOC persons, Black, Indigenous, people of color, are overrepresented among frontline workers today. Their rate of coronavirus infection doubles that of white Americans. This disparity has sources in another, that BIPOC persons make 75 cents for every dollar that white persons make. This is the national average according to the Department of Labor. In the state of Minnesota, the number drops to 70 cents. These disparities are the consequence of racism. Racism can be defined as a cultural system of power, privilege, and bias that denies or diminishes human dignity and respect for some members of society, and that leads to maldistribution of life goods and their attendant evils. This evening, we focus upon what people of goodwill should expect of the business community to uphold dignity and respect for BIPOC employees and to include them in the goods of work that white people often take for granted. Opportunity for employment with fair compensation, benefits, protections, possibilities for growth and advancement through education and apprenticeship, promotion, opportunities for business ownership. Before we turn to our panelists, I want to note what the ELCA teaches about racism and to situate our conversation in our troubled era as a nation. In 1993, the ELCA, early in its social witness, brought out a social statement, Freed in Christ, Race, Ethnicity, and Culture. The statement is comprehensive, nuanced, and action-oriented, and striking in three respects. First, the statement speaks to the American denial of racism through the metaphor of facing God, and facing obstacles. Here, see the writing of Ibram X. Kendi on denial. Second, the document says repeatedly and in 11 different ways that it is time to act. Third, the statement calls for doing justice through leadership, witness, deliberation, and advocacy. Lutherans are called to serious anti-racism and DEI work. This is 1993. Fast forward to 2019. In response to shocking and galvanizing events of violence against Black Americans at the hands of armed citizens and police, as well as organized hate groups, the churchwide assembly passed a social policy resolution condemning white supremacy and racist rhetoric. It calls for Christians to actively oppose racism and white supremacy and thus to join cause with anti-racist movements in our time. While the ELCA remains, despite good faith intentions and serious endeavors, among the whitest churches in the US, its social thought speaks strongly and consistently to the imperative of ending racism. It is time for our nation to face up to racism, to end the denial, and to dismantle it as Americans did with the abolition of slavery. This, or something like it, has become a pervasive public conviction during the course of 2020 following the death of George Floyd in police custody. Today, according to a Monmouth University poll, 3 in 4 Americans are willing to say that racial and ethnic discrimination is a, quote, big problem. 5 years ago, only 2 in 4 would agree. Social thinkers see an anti-racist revolution, an inflection point, a turning point, a portal. Millions of Americans see race relations, hopefully more honestly and accurately. A reckoning of some kind is going on within our society, American business included. Yet this turning point, this reckoning, is also happening during very high levels of social conflict and very low levels of social trust in institutions and in one another, which have been exposed and accelerated by the pandemic, exposed and accelerated by lethal police action against yet another African American for all the world to witness. According to the General Social Survey, only about 1/3 of Americans will say they trust one another and the institutions upon which society depends and which enable social change. Only 1/3. 20 years ago, it would have been double that rate. Policing, public health science, the press, the electoral process, the list goes on. We must note again that this distrust has grown significantly over the last 20 years. Unfortunately, young Americans experience it as normal, while BIPOC people, the working poor and lower middle class, are even more distrustful and insecure. They have long known neglect and exclusion. Now they encounter aggressive and even explosive contempt and illegitimacy in public life that counts as democratic conduct. One of the great goods of institutional and interpersonal trust is a sense of security. BIPOC persons know the insecurity of distrust all too well, and so do many young Americans. So where do we go from here? The conversation we will enjoy this evening represents a constructive effort to rebuild social trust. Why? To empower collective democratic action to dismantle racism one piece at a time. Social thinkers are calling us to rebuild our broken institutions. Civil public discourse is one response. Working together in diversity to address complex problems also builds trust and proves the promise of inclusive excellence. Tonight, we will hear about both strategies for change. We are privileged to engage in conversation with 3 persons from the American business community who represent different contexts in which anti-racism work in business can and must be done. Rosa Miller is an engineer who worked throughout her professional life for the 3M Company, a Minnesota-based multinational corporation operating in the field of industry, worker safety, healthcare, and consumer goods. It employs 90,000 people in 70 countries. Ms. Miller concluded her career as a division vice president after leading in several divisions in Latin America, Africa, and Asia Pacific. During her 3M work and beyond, Ms. Miller has undertaken extensive community engagement in education, healthcare, and the arts, with a special interest in math and science education for children. Today, she serves on various educational and arts boards, including the Concordia Board of Regents. Shantarius Akins teaches management in the Offutt School of Business at Concordia. His current research interests include leader-member exchange leadership, entrepreneurship, and business pedagogy. He has given papers on these subjects for various management academies and published articles on teaching and learning for the lead journals in his field. Dr. Akins began his work in higher education in student affairs at D1 institutions in Arkansas, Michigan, and Texas before shifting to the professoriate. He taught at public universities in Texas and North Dakota before coming to Concordia. Dr. Akins understands his work at the college to be a vocation with a calling to be real and authentic with students in his classroom while building bridges among them. Alexandre Cusa was born in Rwanda and grew up in Africa and Europe prior to study at Concordia College, where he majored in communications and Spanish, followed by study in communications at NDSU. Since arriving in Fargo-Moorhead, Mr. Cusa has championed thinking globally while acting locally through many community involvements. In addition to responsibilities in international business development at Fargo Jet Center, Mr. Cusa has been intensively engaged as a community liaison with Folkways, a local culture creation organization focused on the role small business and the arts play in vibrant community. Through service on local and national boards, Mr. Cusa brings interests in diversity, equity, and inclusion to business development in the Fargo-Moorhead area. We begin this evening then with remarks from our panelists, followed by conversation between them and concluding with your questions. Rosa, the floor is yours.
Good evening. It's good to participate in this panel conversation focusing on racism in corporate America. My comments are regarding my experience in diversity, equity, inclusion at work. The old name, it used to be a different name, but that hasn't changed much the focus. There has been progress in this area, but we must continue to increase representation of Black, Latino, and other underrepresented ethnic minorities to at least 16% of our workforce by year 2023 to reflect the communities in which we operate and the customers we serve. Because we like it or not, the quote unquote minorities will take over more than 50% in the next 5 to 10 years. When equality, diversity, and inclusion are present in the workplace, businesses can become more successful. Why? Because employees will be invested, motivated, and contented. Bullying, harassment, and discrimination will be eliminated, hopefully, avoiding high legal cases. Before I continue with these general comments, let's talk about some data in the employment in corporate America. And I will focus on race and gender in 2020. Gender, 61% male, 39% female. Ethnicity, 45% white, 32% Asian, 8% Latin, 3% Black, and other races, 12%. And this is for both male and females together. So what happened at executive level, at the executive suite, the CEO and their direct reports? The data in 2018 says males 74%, average age 52 years old. Female 26%, age 51 years old. Progress for women compared to 20 years ago. Regarding race, both male and females, 82% white, 6% Asian, and other races, 12%. While males continue to have the large share, while women are making progress at executive suite. Asians are slowly emerging, while the other races are not picking up the pace. I was asked to talk about 3M, a very American and Minnesota company. I started at this company right after graduate school in the 70s. At that time, the percent of engineering graduates for females was about 2%. When I started at 3M in the research and development organization, I was the only female engineer among 50 plus male engineers. I was indeed a novelty. Having grown up with three brothers closer to my age and being also a novelty at Arizona State University Chemical Engineering College, where I got my undergraduate and graduate degrees, I felt that I could navigate the male world of engineering and the corporate world. It was not easy, as my peers constantly remind me that I was taking a job from a male engineer and a head of household. Besides other comments, not very becoming, and activities about how I look, how I talk, how I walk. So my strategy was, I'm not going to be bullied by anybody. The only way to show that women are as good as men in capacity and intelligence. So I decided that I will not only deliver project outcomes, but I will seek them. Successfully in my strategy, after 3 years in R&D, I was promoted and transferred to the manufacturing process development at a traffic control business. They make all the traffic signs all over the world. So my assignments were at night shifts in plants located in Texas, Iowa, and Alabama. Again, I was a novelty, but it wasn't new to me, so I didn't care much about it. Then I got my Master in International Management as a component of the Master of Business Administration and was transferred to the 3M healthcare business. Then twice to overseas to preside over companies in Asia and Latin America. Then back to Minnesota to lead consecutively 2 different businesses and finally consolidate 2 businesses into one as per customer needs. In late 2006, I was a steward of one of the international organizations. My learning and exceeding business targets outcome was the reason why I decided that having the privilege of work with a very talented group of employees that call themselves 3Mers, I find out that how can I motivate when I move into the next job? And it was easy because I continued the strategy, exceeding result. So I developed this model, quote, unrealistic expectations deliver extraordinary results. And my financial director created the charts to show the employees, because when you're in the corporate world, you receive financial targets once a year, every quarter, and every month. And every time that we showed the targets, the employee said, my God, that is not possible, it's unrealistic. And I showed the charts and said, no, look at what you have done. Every year you have exceeded the targets. So that was a way that I always suggest to people, my mentees says, just show them how much they can do. And it doesn't matter if they're black, white, male, female, doesn't matter. I signed it out of 3M in mid-2013 to relax and dedicate more time to serving the community, even though I was doing that during my work at 3M. My passion for education, healthcare, and arts, focusing on children and young college students that will become first-generation graduates and their families. And this is the area that I spend much of my time these days, quite rewarding and fulfilling. Now let's go back to 3M. How about 3M performance within DEI? In those days, in my days when I came, it was called affirmative action, and it was more about quotas. Progress has been made from when I arrived to today. I worked during the tenure of 6 CEOs, all white males, 2 of them white Europeans, average age late 50s, early 60s. I will share some of the 3M workforce data in the US that shows progress in the new hiring of a diverse workforce. Regarding ethnicity in 2015, it was 82% white, 18% not white. In 2019, 72% white, 28% non-white. Progress. 3M is a very global company with 63 wholly owned subsidiaries and operates in more than 200 countries. The global data that I'm going to share with you regarding DEI is only about gender, because outside the US, they don't measure the ethnicity, because if you are in 3M South Africa, about 99% of employees are Black. If you are in 3M Colombia, the majority of the employees are Latinos. So in the US, in 2015 to 2020, 37%, up 3%. Canada, 36%, down 2%. And that is because we reduced the workforce. In Europe, Middle East, and Africa, 36%, no change. Asia Pacific, from China, Southeast Asia, and India, 43%, up 15%. In Latin America, 57%, up 7%. So that is gender. You can see that the quote unquote developing countries are the ones that they seem to appreciate the workforce with females in Latin America already more than 50%. In Asia Pacific, up about 43%. So what happened at the executive suite of 3M? So the CEO and their direct reports. Regarding gender, male, 61%, female, 39%. Boy, that is a lot of progress from the day that I came into 3M. Regarding ethnicity, in the men category, white, 64%, Asians, 27%, Latin, 9%. And women, white women, 72%, Asians, 14%, Middle East, 14%. So what is missing? There is no one single Black. To continue driving DEI at 3M, the current CEO has created a CEO Inclusion Council, a diverse 3M group of leaders from across the globe that focuses on elevating and prioritizing actions to build a more inclusive and competitive workplace. Mark Roman, the current CEO, signed a Catalyst Champion for Change along with other 50+ global companies and Catalyst Incorporated. Founded in 1962, Catalyst is a global nonprofit that works with over 800 companies around the world to accelerate women into leadership positions. Mark made a very strong organizational commitment to support DEI at 3M. And in 2017, 3M won the prestigious Catalyst Award for its commitment to diversity and inclusion. He also is quite committed to advance social justice within 3M and the community by creating a new leadership role. 3M announced the first ever Director of Social Justice Strategy and Initiatives. Mr. Garfield Bowen works with leaders across the company to develop and execute 3M social justice strategies. The focus is to connect people across the company while creating community engagement. It's very important to reflect and within the company what is happening in the community engagement regarding DEI. Mr. Bowen's experience in project management, Lean Six Sigma, his leadership in the 3M's African American network, and his service with community organizations such as Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity makes him the right person for this role. 3M is fully committed to the design and implementation of workforce development initiatives that advance racial equality, empower an inclusive culture, and model social justice in the future of work. It starts with strengthening an inclusive culture, removing systematic internal barriers that I know them very well, advancing STEM and workforce development for underrepresented groups, within the community to empower diversity and inclusion advocacy inside and outside of 3M. The CEO created this November 5th, 2020 as the 3M Global Inclusion Day. From now on, every November 5th, the 3M companies around the world will be celebrating the 3M Global Inclusion Day. I think this is very, very good. As I look from the outside, I'm pleased with the ongoing progress that 3M continues to drive to shorten the very long road to DEI advocacy and culture. But 3M must be very intentional to relentlessly drive and measure the progress and to continue to educate its own management to understand the importance of DEI as the key tactic of the 3M growth strategy. So, regarding DEI, I gave you data about gender and ethnicity, but DEI is not only about gender and race. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are indispensable to academic excellence and the holistic development of a student. This is my message to college, universities that must include people of diverse races, geographic origins, socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnicities, gender identity, sexual orientation, work experiences, religions, physical and intellectual abilities, and financial means. The common goal should be the shared commitment to advance DEI in corporate America, since these students will be the DEI of corporate America leaders. I will conclude with this quotation by Alexander Den Heiger, a Dutch inspirational speaker. His talks are about leadership, transformation, and purpose that fits perfectly DEI. Quote, when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosa, and thank you for that account of DEI. At 3M, we look forward to exploring some of the forces that are driving that change and how that represents what's going on.
Leadership. Yeah. Leadership from the
leadership.
top.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shantarius, please.
Great. Well, first of all, just want to say thank you for the opportunity to have an opportunity to be a part of this panel. This is something that really is important to me in terms of my role, and I talked a little bit about in my my bio, my vocation, and I think that for what I want to focus on in my comments is I want to talk a little bit about this particular topic from the realm of higher education, because all of my experience has been working in different higher education institutions. And so what I want to do is I want to kind of talk a little bit about how I see it, my perspectives in my role. And I also want to kind of, I think it's important to understand the context. I want to talk about my background so that you can have a good understanding of how I look at things or how I perceive things, knowing that it's just one perspective. And this is just my perspective and how I look at things, because I think it really shapes in terms of, when I'm invited to go and speak to students or I have conversations, this is how I look at things when I have conversations. And then I also want to talk a little bit about some of the questions that was posed regarding employment realities, experiences, what the role of business educators are that way. And I want to weave in some stories to kind of hopefully to illustrate and make these things come to life. And then I want to kind of conclude with, okay, so now we're talking about these things, where do we go next? And to share some perspectives regarding what are some concrete strategies that can occur specifically within higher education, but possibly in other sectors. So with that, let me start with kind of my experiences. And I want to start with kind of reading my vocation in terms of how I approach things, regardless of if it's in my professional career, personal life, personal ventures. that my vocation is to be a mentor, a listening ear, a conversationalist, a guide, a problem solver, a learner, and a peacemaker. And let me kind of share with you my background. Whenever I do speeches like this, I always tell people that you can probably tell from the way I talk that I'm not from the Midwest. I grew up in the South. Uh, and and one of the things about my demeanor and how I approach things is I like to focus on the things that I can control, and the stuff that I can't control, I pray about it. So that's kind of a way that I approach different things. And even though I acknowledge my identity as an African American male, one of the things that I share with people is that that is one part of my identity, but that doesn't make up everything that I am. There's so many other roles and different aspects of my identity and so forth. But the key phrase that I want to kind of share with when I talk about some of these topics is I think to a lot of degree that this particular moment, this conversation that we're having, um, my role here at Concordia, other places, is it's almost like I was being prepared for this when I was growing up. Because when I grew up in elementary school, junior high school, I was typically the only one. And what I mean by that is the only African American male, whether it's playing certain sports, doing different activities, baseball team. I was typically the only one African American. And at a very early age, I had to learn um, how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. I had to learn how do I navigate um, different things, and that's, and some might argue that that's difficult for young children to deal with, but in the reality there's a lot of people that are struggling with those identity things. How do I keep the essence of who I am but also work in different cultures that may be different from that? Um, and it wasn't until I came across the work of W.E.B. Du Bois when he talked about the double consciousness that a lot of African Americans, and keep in mind, this particular work was written back in 1903, but it really captured the essence of the ability to see things from different perspectives. And for African American males, um, for the most part, looking at things through other people's eyes and seeing it from different perspectives. And I share that when I go and talk to students about when they ask me the question, what's it like to be an African American male in higher education? I share with them, these are the perspectives. I can see things from multiple perspectives. And sometimes it's a struggle. And I also thought about that from the perspective of that, I'm 45 years old and I still struggle with some of the things that I'm seeing and navigating with that. So if I'm struggling with those things, how might someone who is younger than me, who is an entering student, 18 years old, even younger than that, how might they struggle with trying to navigate these complexities and things? And so with this, I want to kind of move and talk with you about some of the experiences that I've had um, working in higher education, and just to kind of let you know, and if you're in one of my classes, and perhaps maybe one of my students is in this webinar, is I like to keep it real. I like to just share the experiences and just kind of talk about that. But one of the questions I was thinking about was regarding the employment realities and the work experiences, specifically those of color. And I know from my perspective, one of the things that I share with people is that it does have an effect on my travel. I talked about how uh, growing up in the South, I'm always very mindful of different places I travel. To kind of give you the context, some of you have probably seen the movie Green Book that came out, I think, 1 or 2 years ago, and it talked about this the experiences of a professional musician, African American, being driven by someone who's white through the South, and it shares those different experiences. Well, when I go and talk to students about that, I share experiences of things that I've experienced, where when I travel places, I'm always very mindful of where I stop. I plan out where I'm going. I let people know about these things. And I was sharing this with a colleague of mine who's in higher education, And I talked about how I had to be very careful because I don't want to, when I drive and I go different places, I need to be very mindful of where I am because, you know, I may run into a sundown town. Now, this is someone who said they had no idea what that was. And if you know anything about me, I shared the experiences. And when I was traveling, and this was in 2015, 2017, I drove through a particular town on vacation and I came across a billboard that was very disturbing, to say the least. And I took a picture of it and I showed it to my colleague and my mentor. And it was almost like he went, I had no idea that these things existed. And I do those things for the perspective of educating people on these are the experiences. And during those conversations, he shared with me how, whenever I travel, I don't have to worry about where I'm stopping or what I'm doing, and I just go. And those are things that, whenever I travel in terms of different conferences and speaking, I'm very mindful of that. I also think that it does have an effect in terms of the employment realities regarding work. Um, I think Rosa had mentioned this a little bit earlier regarding working and those different perceptions and things. And I know for me personally, what I've had to do through my career, I've always felt like I've had to work twice as hard just to show that I actually belong at the table. And but kind of my upbringing, the essence of who I am is about excellence. And my mother always taught me, focus on your work, make sure your work is good, because you want your work to stand for itself. But at times that can be challenging when you have a certain standard that's different from others. And trying to navigate that and trying to do the best you can with that, that can be difficult at times. Um, Now I want to talk about the role regarding business educators because I had a very unique experience. Um, my first teaching experience was at Texas A&M University, and uh, the associate dean there at the time made a comment that I thought was really profound. When I was going to my first official teaching role, she said to me that, Shantarius, is very important for our students to see an African American male in a position of authority and leadership, because if we don't have that, they're going to be at a disadvantage, because when they go out to the workforce, they're going to have individuals that are working from them that meet those descriptions. They need to see that. That needs to become part of those experiences. And it was at that point that I realized that not only do I have a general role as a management educator, but I also have that role in terms of modeling what those healthy conversations and things should look like. And so my role as a management educator is to role model what healthy conversations would look like when it comes to diversity and things. For example, in my organizational behavior class, I talk about the importance of surface diversity versus deep diversity, and how we need to be very mindful that we can look at certain things on the surface, but we need to go deeper than that. And what you'll find is that a lot of times, the things that we have in common, we may not see those at the surface level, and we need to have those conversations with that. And also, I think it's important that, kind of going forward in terms of where we go next, is realizing that, from my perspective, it's important to have those individual conversations. Um, I'm very cognizant of this, and part of this kind of does bother me. I think that we live in a culture, and the best way that I can describe it is a gotcha culture, where people may say something, and now granted, sometimes people just say stupid things, but there may be sometimes someone says something and they don't know that they don't know. And one of the things that, in my vocation and in my role as an educator, is to figure out what are the best ways to have those conversations and to be a bridge builder, and recognizing that my role as not only as an educator, but also having my identity as African American male, what can I do to help facilitate that? So I want to talk about a few things of what I've tried to do, some specific things that I think going forward would kind of help that, and what I've seen that works specifically within higher education in the classroom. So the first thing I want to talk about is this phrase, and I want to give credit where credit is due for this. This is a phrase that I heard Dr. Edward Antonio say. He's the Chief Diversity Officer at Concordia. When we were doing implicit bias training for the Office School of Business early this summer, I shared a story about when I was doing my undergraduate work, and I'll share the story real quick, where it was a bunch of us friends, we were having a conversation, doing some different things. And there was a lady, white lady, who had said, wow, this is really good to be around a bunch of colored people. Now, I just kind of stopped because, keeping in mind my demeanor, I'm always trying to ask questions. So I looked at her and I said, well, colored person, what do you mean colored person? And she's like, well, a colored person. And I, in my way of saying, I said, well, what color am I? Am I purple, red? What color are you talking about? And she says, well, um, Black American. And I said, well, it's okay to say Black. She's like, well, I was told growing up that if you call someone who's Black, they're offended with that, which kind of threw me for the loop. I said, well, where did you come from? Or what city did you come from? And when she told me, I went, oh, okay, that explains everything. But it was an opportunity for me to have a conversation with that. And the phrase that, when I shared that story, Dr. Antonio talked about is, how can we as individuals, and this, I know specifically it's important in education, is when we see those moments, those teachable moments, how do we call people out, but at the same time call them in? So I think about, if you think about the illustration, if you're at a restaurant or you're out somewhere, and let's say that you have on some articles of clothing and it's not um, the way it should be, it's one thing to call someone out on that versus saying, hey, I noticed this, you might want to fix that. And there's a way that we can actually do those things. The second thing is being open. I think, given the whole culture, this gotcha culture, that there are people that are afraid to ask questions for fear of offending people. And one of the things that I've tried to do when I go to and I speak to other students, other colleges, and having individual conversations, is I really want to set the stage to say, this is a safe place to ask questions, because I realize from my perspective that um, I want to be someone that is going to build that bridge. And I've had various conversations with students in my classroom, advisees. For example, I had one student who came to me and said, was kind of very shy, and said, I want to ask this question, but I don't want to offend you. And my response is, look, ask the question. And the question was really simple. Do you prefer to be called African American or Black? And it was a really good opportunity for me to share, well, here are my preferences. Other people have different perspectives, and that's okay. But it was a really good, meaningful dialogue. Now, and the reason why I think that's important is because, yes, that was just one conversation, but it was one important conversation. And if we focus on individual conversations and things over time, we can build that culture of trust. I had one student that asked me the questions about using specific razors and so forth for African American males. I actually had a student from NDSU, when I gave a speech talking about being an African American male, um, literally emailed me and said, I just want to take 30 minutes of your time because there was a question that I've always wanted to ask someone, but I've never got a chance to meet someone that I felt comfortable talking with. And what started out as a 30-minute conversation, or what was supposed to be a 30-minute conversation, turned into a 2-hour conversation. But from my perspective, it actually built that bridge. And the last thing I want to mention, and I think this goes specifically when it comes to not just within my role as a teacher, is giving grace. Because I think a lot of times, as I said, sometimes people just say stupid things, but there's some people that just don't know that they don't know. And this is something that I'm really passionate about as an educator. Um, as a teacher, if I, or let's put it this way, if you were a student in a classroom and you had a teacher that was asking a question, and they called on you to answer the question or to solve a problem. And let's say that you got it wrong or you were way off base or whatever, and that professor was really rude and condescending to you, I guarantee you, you as a student, you would never ask another question in that class again. And that's unfortunate because if we're going to get over some of these issues in terms of misunderstandings and racism, there always has to be um, this opening in terms of we could actually build bridges and talk about those different things. And so one of the things that I do in my classes, I really try to make sure to have those open conversations and to create that culture where we can actually talk about those things. Because I think earlier mentioned talking about um, we can build that social trust, because I think that's at the underlying root of some of the issues that we're having. Now, once again, this is one perspective. This is how I approach it. Um, but I'm looking at it specifically from those individual conversations, being open, being willing to have those conversations, and doing it one individual at a time. And so thank you very much for letting me have a chance to share my comments.
Thank you, Shantaris, and thank you for lifting up the element of security and fear that is a part of the dynamics that we want to look at further tonight in terms of finding ways to speak across our divisions and to work together. So that's a very helpful start. Alex, please share your experience.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. So, Mujira Mahoro, peace be with you in my mother tongue, Kinyarwanda. So it's always interesting and an honor to be given an opportunity to pause, think, and reflect on one's journey. So I'm always grateful for my alma mater, Concordia College, and as well to be included at such an interesting panel with other stellar people, where I feel really elevated to be associated to Rosa and Shantarius. And it's always, I think, interesting to see, listening to other people's narratives, talking about one topic, but coming it from a different angle in a very, almost like in a triangulation way. So very humbled. So a little bit about myself, Alexandre Kiusa, born in Paris, France, from Rwandan parents. They met while they were studying. And my mom worked at the UN 25 years. So I'm often classified as a Rwandan third culture kid. So you want to think of as well, when you think of military kids or missionary kids or kids of diplomats in general, where maybe you're from a certain country, but you didn't really grow up in that country of origin of your parents. And in my case, I just turned 30 this year. I only lived 3 years in Rwanda, but 27 years of the rest of my life was in different countries in Africa for my elementary studies. So Guinea, West Africa, Rwanda, and Ethiopia. And then middle and high school in Geneva, Switzerland. Then came to the US to attend Concordia College. K through 12 was done in French. So I'm pretty sure some of you have caught already on my exotic accent. Is because my first language is in English. And it's interesting when I talk about accents, because it's often when you think of the job market, when you think of when you're moving to a new country, oftentimes an accent can either promote you or disqualify you when it comes to your competence. And it's often very interesting because when you think of accents, I've came to the conclusion that if you're in the US, for instance, if you have a British accent, it's very sophisticated, it's very royal, it's oftentimes looked up to. When you think of a more Western European accent, still mostly nostalgic, that heritage, maybe my grandpa was German, my grandpa was Norwegian, so you name the whole list. Now, when you have a more East European, sometimes it can inspire suspicion. Oh, that's the ex-Soviet bloc. And then the rest, honestly, when you're from the Commonwealth countries, which are still British colonies, but not of European descent, could be East Indian, could be from different African countries, Latin America, and different areas. That's where, and I'm in that category in a way, that's where your education can sometimes be, again, challenged, which has always been an interesting thing, because oftentimes when someone has an accent, that means they most of the time speak another language. And a lot of us, I hope, know that it's been proven that kids from a young age that speak many languages outperform kids that only speak one language. But it's always interesting because I've seen it many times throughout my academic years and also when you're at work. Oftentimes when you start speaking, you can sense that people in the room are now thinking, I'm not sure if that's the person I'm going to turn to whenever I have pertinent questions. When it comes to this buzzword of this very unprecedented year, but as well, this word has been thrown around a lot, diversity. I feel that diversity is quite a loaded word because it's oftentimes used in many ways. It could be used to the betterment of society, but as well to the detriment. To the betterment, a lot of us, I'm pretty sure, know what it means to be more inclusive, is to be more intentional and mindful. But to the detriment sometimes, that's when I believe you can think of tokenism. You can think of as well sometimes approaching a group in a very monolithic way. That's why I really appreciated that Dr. Shontarius really made sure that when he was speaking, he was saying, I'm speaking on behalf of myself. Same here, when I'm talking to you, don't think I'm the typical Rwandan. When I'm talking to you, I'm not the typical international student from Rwanda. I'm not the typical UN kid. I'm just Alexandre Cusa talking to you. But oftentimes I've seen when, because of your God-given skills, because of the life you've had, and I'm always grateful for the life my mom gave me, a lot of time people can say, well, why don't they all act like blank of that underrepresented group? And that's where sometimes it puts a lot of pressure on you, because not only when you enter certain rooms, you're the only one, but now you realize now the way you act, whatever you do or don't do, you're gonna be an ambassador, you're gonna be representative of many other people. And that's where oftentimes that hypervigilance kind of kicks in, because I've seen myself, and it's interesting, I think my life prepared me for such occasion, but being a UN kid where a lot of times I would have to, every 3-4 years, I would relocate. So I've had a heightened way of adapting, a heightened way of analyzing what's around me, and a heightened way of learning what are the local norms. So I remember when I landed here 10 years ago, English was already pretty good, but I had to obviously, as soon as I could, adapt to maybe more localized, if I may say, accent, although I still have, and I'm very proud of my still exotic accent. But these have been ways where I've been able to navigate and to propel myself in different rooms, in different occupations. But then I often shy away when other people maybe see me and now they can think, well, if Cusa did it, why can the other do it as well? He's here. What's wrong with the others? How come they're saying this, whereas he's doing that? That's why I always, it's an invitation to people to realize that we're all on our own journey. We all have our own attributes, and we all have our adaptability skills. And not everyone has the same, attributes in adapting to a new sphere or a new circle. The interesting thing is lived experiences versus intellectualizing experiences. These are big two things I'm very interested into, because when I think of how a lot of organization, a lot of workplaces, a lot of circles I've been fortunate to be exposed to, have thought of how maybe I want to be more inclusive, to have maybe more Muslim people at my events. But then if you start reading books about how Muslim navigate certain events, I think it never can really honor what it is to have that lived experience of being a Muslim in a certain society, that lived experience of what it is to be maybe a woman in a room predominantly with predominantly male. So that's why I've always encouraged that representation. That matters, but in a mindful way and in an intentional way, because I think all of us can relate to when you are invited. And as soon as you're maybe in that room, as soon as you're maybe in that circle, you realize, wait a minute, oh my God, I see why I'm here. I'm here because blank. And I can really tell you that oftentimes, as much as it is flattering to be invited to amazing upper spheres or certain very exclusive circles, pretty soon you realize that your presence is just because of a certain box maybe they had to check. And that can automatically heighten that imposter syndrome where you're thinking, am I really here because I'm supposed to be here? Or am I here because they want to get a grant, because they want to check a box for end of year filing of God knows what kind of document, where to show that they represent a specific type of demographic. So oftentimes, these have been things that I have to often check myself. And that self-awareness, I think, as someone who's been very fortunate to travel from a very young age, is something that I go around all the time. I'm aware when I step in a room that I have an exotic accent. I'm aware that I have a certain type of clothing. I'm always very proud of my African heritage. I'm aware that I navigate society in a different way. However, this has helped me to my advantage, but as well, sometimes I can see that people meet me with resistance, because oftentimes change is not the most pleasant thing. And change is oftentimes can be faced in a very combative way, where it's your way or the highway. Whereas I always thought, and I always think that there's many ways actually, but again, depending who's in front of you. When I think of racism, I always want to make sure we're all on the same page on racism. Basically is prejudice plus institutional power. So when you think of if I apply with my name or if I make a phone call with my accent, someone can have the decision of either hiring me or not hiring me. Someone can have the decision of promoting me or not promoting me. And that's where oftentimes I've seen, it's a human thing, by the way. I've been very fortunate. When you go around the globe, you realize that a lot of people have prejudices. This is a very deeply rooted human thing. You're taller, you're shorter, you're different. But once now you add the power element to it, that's where you have that racism factor. And that's, I often have seen that, for instance, the Fargo-Moorhead area that I've called home away from home for the last 10 years, a lot of my peers that look like me, a lot of my peers that are not of Scandinavian heritage, a lot of my peers that are not maybe of a small town, rural area kind of upbringing, when they graduated, had to relocate, or on the reverse side, if they're recruited here because we have a lot of big companies in the area, within 1 or 2 or 3 years, they relocate. And that attrition rate has been something that we struggle with a lot in this area. And that's why I've joined the Chamber of Commerce, Professionals of Color, because I think it is doing ourselves a disservice if we continue to have heard arguments such as, well, we're a predominantly white area, therefore, what do you expect? It makes sense that my organization or my company is predominantly white. But then I pause and think, in 2020, where you can be based in, yes, predominantly white area, but sometimes you serve the globe, the nation, the region. And that's where I always caution people to remember, who are you serving? To remember, what society do you live in? Of course, we can be in a bubble like the FM area and realize that this is it. But I venture to say that this is not it. And we're part of a bigger element, which is the region, the nation, and the globe. So oftentimes, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice, because no one can represent better people that are not in the room. And words matter. Words matter. I remember this summer I was in a conference where was maybe, let me throw a number, 50 people, and a dozen were BIPOCs, Black, Indigenous, people of color. And at some point, the facilitator said, anyone of the global majority, what do you think? And I had to pause and realize, on that moment, I felt empowered, and rightfully so, because yes, maybe in the US, I'm a minority, but when you think globally, roughly 7 billion people, Caucasian are barely 700, maybe 800 million. The rest are the so-called BIPOCs. So I remember when that person, that lady said the global majority, with just words, I was empowered, and in a factual way, not just empowered to make me feel better, but it made sense. That's where, honestly, I can only say that I think that it is not a favor when we talk about DEI. It is not a favor when we want to have organization, companies that reflect society, that reflect the 2020 globe. It is a duty, and as well, it is a benefit for that company. It is a benefit for that institution, because it's also more attractive. I can only think of different conversation I've been part of at Concordia and off campus as well, where people even say that now some Caucasian of other urban areas, when they come to the Fargo-Moorhead area, or when they come to potential different predominantly white institution, they're not even as attracted because they know, because maybe they grew up around a very diverse demographic, that this is no longer a reality in 2020. So it's no longer, it's not only being more reflective of the society we live in, but it's also to be as up to date and as well as accurate with what society is in 2020. I leave you with saying that the two jobs that I'm very proud to be associated with and that I participate actively were actually jobs I would say that realized that this was the fact. And at Folkways, for instance, as the community liaison, I've been known and I've been the person in charge of building lasting partnership with different community stakeholders, anything from the immigrant community to law enforcement, to different government entities, to academic institution. But we knew that someone that is able to navigate should be also someone that have had that lived experience, not only that have read books on how to be a good community liaison. Last but not least, my work at the Fargo Jet Center, we're an international company and we serve markets around the globe. And oftentimes we've seen that our customers have more buy-in when they see that we come to that country, or when we're doing, let's say, a virtual call, and that there's someone that not only is from maybe that part of the region, but as well that has those nuances. So with that, I can only leave you with an African proverb, because that's how a lot of our wisdom is transmitted on the African continent is, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So I think that this is not a you thing, a me thing, it's an us thing. And the last thing when I say us is as well to white allies on this call, white allies that are always elevating others people's voices. I'll remind you this, when women were finally and rightfully so given the ability to vote, it took men to say, hey, other men, how come women cannot vote? So that allyship is instrumental in advancing such causes. And you as well, don't think it's just gonna be incumbent on BIPOCs to keep saying, let us in, let us in. It's gonna take you as well, who's already inside, to let us in by telling your peers that maybe sometime I'm more gonna listen to you because you look like them. Murakoze cyane, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for taking us into the depth of your involvements, because I want to begin our reflections, I think, in thinking about the character of progress. But first, I want to invite our guest tonight, our audience, to submit questions in the Q&A function. Good colleague Carol Hedberg is off-site gathering those questions, and we'll turn to those in a minute. But I'd like to bring our panelists back. And if you wouldn't mind, I think many of us on this call, this program, are really curious about our moment. We're really curious about whether there is a shifting of perspective, there is a shifting of sensibilities, that something happened this summer in response to the death of George Floyd. Something broke, something changed. I mean, we've all had our hopes dashed in life, but there is, the response across society and the language that people who are not naive are using about revolution or inflection point or portal, are words that they've carefully considered. And coming from the various life perspectives you've had, the different encounters and that you've had, how do you receive that kind of language? Do you feel like we've reached an interesting historical moment that's a moment of opportunity and a moment of promise? Or are you worried that the forces against that are about to undermine that? Thoughts on that?
I'll start a little bit, just kind of share some perspectives. I was traveling this summer when the incident occurred, and kind of to share the context. We've always heard about issues in terms of law enforcement and so forth. And I want to be very clear that when I make these comments, that I'm very supportive of law enforcement. We need that in our community and things, but there have been some issues with that. And what I think has happened, I was sharing with one of my friends this summer, is um, he said that, given everything, the context of, COVID-19, we're not really out and about, that seeing that incident, it brought it to people's attention. I mean, there was no hiding from that. It brought it to the surface, and it did something to a lot of people. Like, as an African American male, when I travel, I get concerned about different things, but it really it did an awakening. And it's unfortunate because someone lost their life with that. And one of my friends has said is that it brought it front and center, where people couldn't just say, oh, well, this is just, they had to address that. And I mean, it was to the point where I had people that I went to school with that I hadn't talked to in almost 15, 20 years that reached out to said, I just want to, they were trying to make sense of that. And so it definitely opened up awareness for people to start talking about these things and listening and saying, we have a serious issue here. And the unfortunate thing is that, as I tell people that, the year is 2020 and we're still having these conversations. We're still doing these things. But it did raise an awareness. And where there was no one for someone to kind of just say, well, maybe that's just an isolated incident. People had to talk about it. They had to talk about it because when it's front and center, when you see that, it really brought it front and center.
Alex, Rosa, reflections?
Well, I hope that you are right. I hope that this is really the breaking point, because how much do you remember about the women's movement, big, huge rallies 2 years, 3 years ago? And suddenly it's all forgotten. Women still get paid 70 cents versus men $1. Women are still being, gone through sexual harassment. We saw that in when they were electing one of the judges for the Supreme Court. And still, nobody talks about that anymore. It's just now in the back burner. So I hope this race in the Mr. Floyd's death, the conversation won't end, because there is the policeman involvement for whatever reason. In the women's march, it was just women got tired. And there's white males, black males, Chinese, Asians, all kind of males, always. It's all about power. It's the power, show power because of ethnicity, of gender. I just hope that this time, at least for the ethnicity point of view and the end of tune down racism in this country, it will probably get an involvement from all races and all gender. So I just hope. I wouldn't say has been and then there is just moving forward. This is going to end. I hope so those are my comments.
Yeah, I'll add to that it's interesting because historically, some of us have read or maybe remember the letter from a Birmingham jail of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And interestingly, in that letter, he mentioned when you think of, there was a minority locking arms, a white minority locking arms and marching, those allies. There was another minority throwing the bricks, throwing the names. That was another minority. But there was a vast majority of the white silent majority, basically, as he called them. And I oftentimes think when we're saying suddenly there was an awakening, when we say suddenly people are noticing, we got to add an ethnicity before the people and the awakening. We're talking again about the white majority, because if you are a BIPOC, this has been your reality I didn't grow up in the US, but oftentimes when I'm talking to my domestic BIPOC Americans, they tell you, I've had the talk. And if I ask my white peers, the talk, what are you talking about? My parents told me, if you're arrested, you tell them, I know my rights, you better back off. So that's why, there's two Americas. So I think the awakening, let's talk about it more, that's the white America that suddenly is realizing our BIPOC brothers and sisters are really suffering, and we keep being silent. That means we're complicit. The other thing as well, which is very important, is knowing that it's a us thing, but we're talking about institutional power and prejudice. This is very a bit like when you talk about gender equity, where people think that the fact that women could be paid the same as men, or the fact that there will be more women in the room, that means less for men, less for men. So it's the same right now. The friction is the more you elevate BIPOCs in the room, at work, and you name all the different boxes we need to check, some people are of the thinking of less for me, less for me. So honestly, it's just a high moment of maybe people noticing more, or people having more smartphone to immortalize an atrocious moment. But as a member of the BIPOC community, as someone who's an avid history reader, only time would tell. But honestly, right now, the big awakening, is for the white silent majority. But the BIPOCs, I would almost dare say it's another day and another dollar. I believe more in what I see than what I hear, but well, time will tell. Thank you.
One thing I'd like to add with that is kind of what Alex said, is that it's important, I think, to share those stories, because those stories, if they're not shared with people, and it can get lost. And so, a lot of things that, my experiences with different things, good and bad, I share those on my personal platforms, because I think it's important for people to hear those things. And it's not to, shame people or do whatever. It's really just to say, here's my experience, and just to share that. And so, so that just one thing I wanted to add with that.
Let me just add another, go ahead.
I would say, education. I think we live in a world where facts are not facts anymore. And people, especially for the race component, the white population in this country, they create their own facts according to what they believe is. And as Alex says, I will have less and less. But somehow the leadership has to come from education, all the way from K to 12th grade, and then at the university, and also in the workplace. We have large companies. If you look at especially the very large, rich companies, they have more diversity in the workforce because of the skills of the people that they bring into. So that's what I'm saying. My hope is that from the educational point of view, we'll be able to change the conversation, and there will be just the value of people for what people is, and it has to me, that is the main area. Education, all the way from pre-kinder through undergraduate.
So if I might add just another level to the last question, if you were speaking to your peers in business, if this was your audience, would you be giving the same sense about where things are going? Would you have the same hopes about what's happening? Because we've heard very good data from Rosa about the trend lines of a typical corporation that has really taken DEI seriously. And that was happening before the events of this summer. This is a long time in the making. So is American business on a trajectory that's pretty unalterable in terms of DEI, or what are the hangups and what are the struggles that have to be addressed in the future? Education's been mentioned as a given that has to be undertaken to continue to expand a workforce that's a diverse workforce. And interestingly, what I'm also struck by is, of course, that corporations with lots of wealth are stepping up with lots of philanthropic work. And the question for me is whether or not that's sufficient on the societal level to prepare that diverse workforce for the work that needs to be done. Corporate America is taking on a lot of responsibility in response to events, but where does the responsibility to make it happen lie?
Well, I will I will say, everything is about leadership. And I am an independent. I am not a political person. In corporate America, it's a lot of politics. And if you ask anybody at 3M, the only thing they will say about me is she's never been political. She just did what she has to do and stood up for what she believes. And for many years, I was a poster child of affirmative action because I was a female in a male's world. Until one day I said, no more. Somebody else has to take the baton and continue. So, and that is what it has to do, it's like concentric circles. You start here, you have one person, then 10 person, then 20, 40, 50. But it has to be not only at the corporate level, it has to be at the government level, at the state level, at the city levels, at the street level. Otherwise, and tell the stories. The secretary says, tell your stories. And some people will agree with you and will hear you, other ones, they won't. Look at what happened in New York, that woman that created an unrealistic story about this gentleman that happens to be Black and was just doing bird watching, and she just didn't like it to be in the same place that he was. It's something that it's hard to believe that could happen, and that one human being will do that to another one. So I think we have to be, each one of us have to have the role and embrace the role that we have change agents in whatever circumstances we are. And it's not easy. It's not easy at all. I lived through that for many years because of being a female in a profession that was known traditionally for women. And look at now, about 25 to 30% of graduates from engineering schools are female now.
So we have a question for Rosa and Alex that really gets at the matter of how the U.S. is perceived abroad, and asks you to think about the choice you made to come to the United States. And if you could redo your life, would you make that choice? Would you come to this country? How do you see it today compared to the other places where you've been? And what do we need to know about how we're viewed abroad? Because, we've been through, again, a period of difficulties for immigrants. I work in that field at the college, and it's a very difficult time for immigration. So would you come to the United States if you could redo your life?
So I'll start by saying that we're talking about an hegemonic country where for the first two World War, the US stepped in and saved, Europe. So first it was kind of, then it was that two Soviet Union and America. Like, I know my elders were still thinking, do I want to study in Moscow? Or then when I was born, I'm a 1990 kid. When the Berlin Wall fell, now the US stepped as the hegemonic country where we dominate. So when you think of my life growing up, you drank Coca-Cola, you listen to MTV music, you watch Hollywood movies, even translated in French, but still Hollywood movies. So you grew up just in a way drinking the culture and drinking any product you can think of. So it is hard to quote unquote ignore America. And I think when you see a nation dominating the world, I from Rwanda, I always thought of, I want to come to this country to study and study as well the country, study the people, and understand better. Because in Rwanda, even if being physically in Rwanda, I was still impacted by whatever is happening in DC. I was impacted by whatever is happening in Hollywood. Even in 03, 04, when Hotel Rwanda came, was a Hollywood movie that told the US and a big portion of the globe what happened in my country. As much as a lot of it was a bit, I would say a bit too much Hollywoodized, but still. So if it's hard to basically ignore the US, and I come from a place of, when you see a successful or very impressive nation, it's good to go learn it from within. So I'll just say that if I had to redo, I will do it again. And one thing though would be between rural America and urban America, because I grew up watching more the urban America. So coming to Fargo for me was a bit different, but I think actually it showed me maybe not as much as the America that is portrayed globally, because that rural America to me showed me maybe where people come from before going to that city. And it got also exposed to me to maybe some of the hidden histories of America, such as the indigenous people, such as murdered and missing indigenous women, such as that we stand on indigenous land, Lakota people, and always honoring that Turtle Island. So I know that had I been maybe in a big city of the US, I wouldn't have been to a powwow, perhaps. So that's why if I had to do it again, Dr. Anderson, yes, I would do it again.
Rosa, any thoughts?
Well, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and the Hopis Indians were the ones that at that time was considered the minority. And but there was, peacefully living. And when I came to Minnesota, I found out this big difference. It's like a different country between what it was at the time. Phoenix wasn't at the level of development that is right now, where a lot of then people from the north descended, like we used to call the snowbird, and many of them made the permanent residence there. So it has changed. So I think the country has changed through the years, and again, it has got worse in the last few years. First, with the election of the first Black president, I think that is what it got the main thing that triggered this division that we see right now, and that as a result is the racism. And it hasn't got any better. So this is the country that I remember the most. This is where I grew up. This is where I went to school. This is where I work. This is where I retire, and this is home.
Thank you. So we have a person who's got a question about how hard it is going to be to dismantle racism, and understands that that will take time. And yet, how do you maintain intention and energy and focus to address this, knowing that it's a lifetime of work? How do you, as individual activists and leaders, negotiate that, the realities and the endurance of certain problems, and yet find ways to make a difference and to see progress? What do you do that you look to and say, we made a difference here this week, today?
I'll start with that. Because I can definitely understand that when, as I said before, this is the year 2020 and we're still having these issues and things. It gets challenging, and sometimes people's patience can run thin with that. Uh, I know from my perspective or how I approach it, because going back to my vocation of being a problem solver, it can be very frustrating to me when I see, okay, I see the problem, I see how it can be fixed, but then when things or people are either unintentionally or intentionally doing things to slow it down, that gets very frustrating. Um, I think one of the ways that I try to approach is that I try not to lose sight of the end goal. Um, I really try to look at, okay, what is the bigger picture? And I'll admit sometimes I'm good at that. Sometimes I fail with that. I think about what is the longer, what's the end goal? What is it that I want to happen? Um, and I think also just whenever I have um, just, and I look at it from like a numbers game. And once again, this is just one. Yeah, I realize that sometimes we can have very lofty goals of what needs to happen, but we have to realize, and this is, I'm looking at it from a management perspective. We talk about different resources, physical resources, financial resource, human resources, but another resource that I think that sometimes we don't realize is that time is an important resource. And if you're an individual, you only have certain amount of time, but you can look at how many conversations did I have? Um, did someone change their perspective, or did I plant a seed here that maybe it's probably not going to grow at this point, but maybe it may grow over time. um, uh, and I think that's a key thing. Now, for someone that is wants to see things happening now, that can be frustrating, but it's almost like trying to look at what is the end goal, and can we just go ahead and plant those seeds, having those individual conversations as best as possible, knowing that some conversations may not be fruitful, but you did put the effort in to do something, and then just trusting the process over time. But also, I think if, for example, if I have a conversation with someone and it changes their perspectives or it enlightens them, or I see that light bulb go off, then here's someone that I've brought into my fold that, okay, this other person can have these conversations as well. It's like a chain reaction, if you will. But I can relate to how that can be frustrating. But really, it's about just keeping the end in mind. What is it that we're trying to focus on? What's the end goal? And realizing that we need to take the actions each day, even though we may not see the fruits of those. That should not be an excuse for us to stop having those conversations or just writing someone off. We should actually continue doing that and doing that and doing that. Otherwise, if we stop, then we're back to square one.
I fully agree with you. When I work at 3M, you know, uh, two other women and me, we were very young in our early 20s, because the lack of women scientists at 3M, we decided to create a group that was called the 3M Women Scientists. And we went to a school to talk to the girls, especially, and we start with the seniors. Then a year later, we realized that was too late, because they will say, oh, my boyfriend won't like me because I go in science. So we started in middle school. And so, because we felt that we had to do something about it, as you said, we have to do something about it. And that has been my life at 3M. When I had the power to hire people, I would hire female and minorities, what is called minorities. And, and, and look at what is 3M right now. I might have been the little grain of sand, but there were other people like me. So you have to do it. And that's what I'm saying. I'm very proud of 3M, because I see that they continue to go. And there are many companies like that. And we just have to do something. What I do now as a, my life of leisure. I am a philanthropist. I put my money where my mouth is, and I support all those children and college students because to me, again, education is the way out of poverty, is the way out of racism, and is, you know, they are very poor white students too. So I don't segregate the scholarships. Money that I provide goes only to minorities, as long as they are the financial needs. They are white, blue, green, doesn't matter. But just educate, and don't stop.
I'll add to that. There's a Chinese proverb that says to move a mountain, you do it one stone at a time. So I'm thinking, when you're thinking of dismantling racism, which is a mountain, like a huge mountain, it's fascinating to see what my fellow panelists say here, because it's each of us, from the white ally to the BIPOC, we all have a stone to move. You got to figure out what's your stone, and you're trying to move it. However, it's also to remember, and that's what earlier Rosa said, education, education, and education, and knowing your history, knowing that you're going against a system, not a people, not someone burning a cross in some rural America, a whole system. So when you think of a systematic problem, you got to come with a systematic kind of tactic or strategy. So, because I think sometimes there's some good feeling, maybe a kumbaya movement, and then we stop. Whereas when you have strategies, and I love what they were saying, women scientists, let's go talk to seniors. Then let's go talk maybe to middle school. That's like, to me, that was strategies and that was the system. But beyond that, honestly, if or so the inner group, those that are already in the room, those that already have that you got as well to have that humility, that understanding to know that maybe you are where you are, of course, because of your competence, but as well of maybe because of a certain affinity group you're part of. And when you can humble yourself to realize this, now you're not going to be as offended. Now you're not going to be as combative when you see someone like me, maybe knocking at the door and saying, hey, it's time for me as well to come in the room. Going to be, you know what? I've done my research. I've looked at good data on what's the benefit of having someone like you in the room. Please, welcome. Whereas if you've done no research, if you just kept being in your own silo and you see someone like myself, Rosa, or Shontarius knocking at your door, obviously as a human, your first reflex is going to be like, they're not like me. I don't share the same lived experience. They're here to take. Whereas a lot of us, if not most of us, are here to add, are here to give, are here to contribute. And to me, it's one, people start realizing that we all have a common goal. We all have a common objective to better society, to better a company when it comes to profit. That's when I think people shift from that mindset maybe of scarcity, me versus them, to abundance. We live in a world of abundance, and there's, I think, plenty for a lot of people. Just as I think a mindset shift, strategies, systematic change, and knowledge of your history, knowledge of how you got where you got. Thank you.
Friends, I'm afraid we need to draw this conversation to a conclusion. I want to reflect for a minute on the fact that you've once again brought us to a central imperative of Concordia education, building on the thought across higher education that we want to prepare our students to address unscripted problems, complex problems, and that will require communities of discourse, cooperation that are diverse, that have different perspectives, different knowledges to take these problems on. And tonight, I think you've exhibited how that works, and you've also shown in your own life experience the change that's occurred within the business culture, because we know that business today runs on teams and collaboration and cooperation, or it doesn't run at all. So there's a great convergence going on between what business needs, what justice needs, and what education is all about. I want to thank you, Rosa Miller, Shontarius Akins, Alexander Cusa, for your insightful reflections this evening. You've helped us to better understand the dimensions of respect in the workplace and provided us with constructive ideas about dismantling racism in American business. I want to thank you for your generosity of time and for modeling of community of commitment. Thank you to colleagues Carol Hedberg, Anna Benson, Anna Brock, Brent Johnson, Todd Wowers, Wade Iverson, Jill Abbott, Edward Antonio, and Eric Johnson for their help with this program. And I want to thank you, our audience, for joining us tonight and for your good questions. Please join us again in January to explore good work in the gig economy. For now, I bid you good night from the Lorentzsen Center for Faith and Work at Concordia College. Stay safe and build on.